Whenever you're ready to go.
Hey, thank you very much. Well, hello, everyone. So I'm Keith Nockels from the University of Leicester, where I am the health librarian and also the convener of our inclusive collections group. More of them in a moment. And two of my colleagues have had an input into this slide presentation, which we previously made at the Metadata and Discovery Group Scotland, very splendidly named Midges, as you might know. So my colleague Louise Goodall is a metadata specialist. My colleague Alex Marshall manages our library systems, but it's just me that you're are stuck with this afternoon. So the presentation looks at our language and content notice that displays in our discovery system, and I'll show that to you in a moment. And at the text in that notice and how we decided where to put it, and a little bit also about the longer inclusive collections policy that lies behind it. If you've got your own experiences about these things, that would be really valuable to know those. So please put things in the chat. If you've got questions, please do the same. And I'm hoping that I'll allow enough time at the end of my presentation for us to take some of those questions. If you want to make contact with me afterwards, or with Louise or with Alex, I will triage your inquiries, but you're welcome to get in touch with me. My email address is there on the slide. So a little about that inclusive collections group. So this is a group within our library and learning service at the university that's led on this project. And our remit is to provide oversight and advice on changing the library's collections to make them more diverse, and therefore support academics who want to make their teaching more diverse, researchers who are making their research more diverse. One of the things we talk about is changes to metadata that's used to describe the items in our collections. There are members of the group from all sections of library and learning services, so academic librarians, subject librarians like myself, metadata and acquisition specialists, somebody from the archives, somebody from the front of house team, somebody from education services, which is now part of the library. It wasn't when we set this group up, but it is now. And that's our colleagues who are learning technologists, educational designers, look after the VLE, that sort of thing. We meet virtually mostly. We do have quarterly meetings where we meet in person in a hybrid way to make sure that we're keeping up to date with everything and things are getting done. And we report to the library's collections development strategy group. That's where we fit in. The activities of this group are part of my appraisal objectives. So each time I meet my line manager for monthly meetings, we make sure that things are happening, as well as at my annual appraisal. So that group's overseen the things that I'll show you. So I'm going to try and stop sharing the slides. Here's where you realize I don't use Zoom very much. And I'm going to try sharing something else instead. So that's the book that somebody mentioned earlier. And hopefully you can see a set of search results from our library search. Please do say in the chat if you can't, or shout at me. So I've searched for something, and at the top of the search results is this inclusive collections notice. Now, if you've looked at the slides that I provided in advance, you might notice that the wording of that has slightly changed. This comes out of a project with our volunteer library champions, more of that in a moment. It used to say inclusive collections statement, it now says inclusive collections notice. So at the top of any set of search results, you get this piece of text that says, when using library search, you may discover some items which contain offensive or harmful language or content, and we recognize they may cause distress. We do not remove, censor, or restrict access to these items as they provide a basis for critical learning and research. So a question that might be in your minds is, what happens when one of our users encounters a potentially harmful or offensive item in the collection? And as things stand, they can encounter physical items on the library shelves, and they won't have seen this notice unless they've used library search to locate that item. But if they know where it is, they know where the books on their subject are, they'll go straight there, and they might come across something that raises these issues. They won't have seen this notice. We recently ran focus groups with these volunteer library champions about the notice and the wording of it. One idea we received was having a printed notice on display in the library. So we're exploring how we might do that, whether we have the notice at the end on the shelf ends, whether we have something that people will see as they come into the library, whether we have something in particular areas of the building or next to the floor plan. So we're thinking seriously about that. This language and content notice, this inclusive collections notice, is there in library search, whatever search you've done. So we hope that people will see it and will know about it if they do then encounter something. The library champions that we did focus groups with suggested also having filtered searches, so you could conduct the search without finding any items like this. We weren't sure how that would technically work, apart from whether you would want it to happen or not. They did comment, interestingly, that seeing this notice made them wonder which items it was in their search results that contained the offensive or harmful language or content. But of course, because this notice appears every time, there may well be nothing in their search. They were also aware that there were subject areas that they were studying that might raise these issues, and they were kind of aware of this and were grateful that we had been transparent about this. They also wondered if we'd give examples somewhere of the sort of items we had in mind. This raises a number of interesting issues. And then also that we would say why we had that item in stock. We could see issues with doing that. We're exploring having more information visible in the longer policy, which I'll show you in a moment, about the sort of thing we mean, so that you might encounter language which is colonialist or sexist or ableist. So the title of this content notice links to the longer statement. The champions did comment that this was not very obvious. It's underlined, I guess you pointed it, it's obvious it's a link, but it's maybe not that obvious. So we're investigating to see if we can add anything to the text that makes that clearer, that there is a bit more information. Hey, I'm going to try stopping sharing that screen and sharing the slides. Okay. There we are. So a little about the inclusive collection statement and the sort of context around it. So there's an institutional context, as there will be in your institutions too, I'm sure, that we're spending time, academic colleagues and people who support them, thinking about making teaching more diverse, more representative of the groups that are within the university. So we have this inclusive collection statement, which I'll show you in a moment, which announces our intention to create diverse and inclusive collections, and it states how we're going to do that, and that those collections are needed to support our teaching and research, and to support academic and research colleagues who are diversifying or decolonizing their work. And the statement also acknowledges, as that shorter notice does, that existing library collections will contain material that contains offensive or harmful language or content. Within higher education as a whole, there's a wider context to it as well. So the University of Leicester was established in 1921 as a university college, became a university in 1958 in its own right. So the library is 100 years old, but there's material in the library that's even older than that. There's a large quantity of stock from the 19th century and the early 20th century, and that will mean that there is material that uses language which is now outdated, or worse than that, might be offensive, displaying colonial attitudes, different attitudes towards different groups of people. So early literature that talks about children with learning disabilities, special learning needs, terminology still changes, doesn't it? But it might refer to them using words like retarded, which we wouldn't use anymore, but the material will say that. Anything on same-sex relationships, homosexuality that's old enough might well look at it as a mental illness. Again, not something we would do now. We use Library of Congress subject headings. Sometimes that's very US-centric. So there may be issues with headings to describe the cultural makeup of the UK, for example. There is a way to make suggestions for changes to those headings, although it's quite a slow process, I gather. And Louise, my colleague, whose name is on the first slide, has been in touch with the Library of Congress to ask them to reconsider using the subject heading Elgin marbles, but to use the heading Parthenon sculptures instead, and that's something which has changed. So there is a way to do it. But of course, we don't update the title words in the items. We can change the subject headings. We can't change the words in the titles or the words in the items themselves. So there's a kind of tension between cataloging rules, where you record things as they are, and cataloguing ethics, where you admit that standards are biased, and we will approach things critically and advocate to make cataloging more inclusive. So there's a need for the statement and a need for making part of that statement visible on library search. So that longer statement is another bit where I stop sharing something, share something else. There might be a quicker way to do this, but I don't know what it is. There we go. Hopefully you can now see on our policies page, our inclusive collections policy. So I won't read this all out or scroll slowly enough for you to read it all at this point, but the link is in the slide, and this is the wider context. A little about projects that the library is undertaking in order to bring this policy about, a little about some of the resources that we've acquired that might help, and something about what we've done with our donations and gifts policy, a way that we've got to accept items that add breadth to the collections, as you can see there, and a little there about what we do about metadata. So the shorter notice is the thing in library search. That's the longer policy, which links from it. So I'll put the slides back. So one of the decisions we made, one of the things we talked about, was whether to put this language and content notice at item level in library search in our discovery system or not. And we decided not to. And there were a number of reasons for this. One was that we have, of course, a large number of items in library collections. Ideally, we would identify the items that raise the issues described in the notice and add the notice to those items. But how would we identify which those items were? There would be some things which very obviously would need the notice. There would be other things that would be offensive or harmful, but we wouldn't necessarily know that. We would need assistance from others to do that. So quite a lot of work involved if we were to just put it on specific items. It might be possible with new acquisitions where we've got a collection or a book in front of us, but the things on the shelves or the things in the online collections would be a whole different thing. That's one reason. And another reason would be the sheer amount of workload. So there are 1.6 FTE catalogers who have lots of other things to do. And this would provide them with far too much work. So we made the decision to put the notice where it is that you've seen it, where it appears at the top of search results, rather than just on items that might raise the issues. So the wording in that notice and the wording in the longer statement, how did we get to that? Well, we started by talking about it in the Inclusive Collections group. We took the suggested wording that we had come up with to our library leadership team, as ultimately the statement is being made in their name. And there were some amendments suggested, which we put in. We then took it to the education leadership group in the university. So this is senior academics, people like directors of learning, directors of teaching. And there were a few suggestions made there, which we incorporated. The education leadership group took our wording and added it to a wider page in the university as a whole on content notice guidance. So I know from the teaching that goes on in the School of Healthcare, one of the schools I support, that if the content within a module is likely to be difficult, perhaps trigger things, and students have experienced the things that they're now studying about. So I'm thinking of mental health, nursing modules, midwifery modules about stillbirth, that kind of thing. So module leaders, teachers are very good at putting notices out to students before the module starts to flag up that this might be possible and to indicate where students can get support. So there's a page on the university website with information about that, and the wording from our statement and the fact that we have this statement has gone on to that page. We talked to the Students' Union officers at the time, this was a couple of years ago, and made one or two amendments after we'd met with them. And then we've just run these focus groups with our volunteer library champions, asking them for thoughts on the statement, the notice, and the wording in it. So that's why it now says Inclusive Collections notice and not statement. They wondered about heading it warning or disclaimer, but we thought that might raise too much alarm, possibly, but we did like the idea of changing it away from statement. So that's why it now says notice. They also suggested having an anonymous feedback form. At the moment, people can send us an email if there's something they want to talk about, but then of course we know who they are and they might prefer to remain anonymous. So we have, we're in the process of installing an anonymized form where people can bring items to our attention, give us their thoughts about the notice and the statement without having to say who they are. The next thing we thought about was the technicalities of putting the language and content notice into our discovery system. So we have Primo, we have Primo VE. We considered a number of options, and if you've got questions or want more information about those options, please do let me know, and I will get one of my colleagues to be in touch with you who understands far more about this than I do. We thought about putting it on the homepage of Library Search and decided nobody would see it if we put it there. We decided on putting it on all the full record displays, but we decided not many people would look at the full record displays, so they wouldn't see it, and it was quite difficult to set it up. So we decided to have it where you saw it on the search results page in what Primo VE calls a resource recommender box. These are quite easy to amend and quite easy to set up. So it's there, it's prominent when people use the search. We've made one or two little amendments to it, and that's been quite straightforward. We get statistics about how many people are clicking the link to go through to the longer policy, which I'll show you in a moment. Then a little about the use of the wording in other contexts. I've talked about this already in regards to the university content notice, that first link on the slide, where it sits within the context of all the other advice to academics about dealing with difficult, harmful content and material in their modules. We've put a version of the notice into our archives catalogue, Calm View. We've put it also into our institutional repository, our research repository. We use Figshare, and we've added the statement to that. And we're looking at adding it to our special collections online, which is a collection of digitized material from our special collections. So the wording has been used in other places as well, within the library and beyond it. And then the last thing we did was to tell people that we've done all of this. So we started by letting library colleagues know about it. Our front of house colleagues who would get inquiries from students by email or by chat or in person, if anyone noticed it or wanted to say something about it. So we made sure that they were aware of it and what it was in case they came across inquiries about it. Other academic librarians are colleagues who support research. We have a team who support talk courses and a team who support research. And then the library more generally. Then we promoted it to our colleagues in education services who are now within the library but weren't at the time, who support design of new courses, changes to modules, the quality approval of courses, that kind of thing, to make sure that they were aware of it. And it has been put, this kind of thing, into the material that people use if they're devising a new course or a new module. We talked about it to academic colleagues, so myself and my academic librarian colleagues go to education committees in the subjects that we support, and we've talked about it at those. We also go to student staff liaison committees in those subjects, so we've mentioned it there, so students are aware of it. There are reps from each of the courses. They're able to tell their colleagues about things. And we've promoted it to the wider library world. So before we did any of this, we put messages on List Decolonize to see what other people were doing. And when we did it, we put messages on List Decolonize to say what we'd done. And we're making, of course, presentations like this one and the one to midges as well. The focus groups we had suggested that we mention this in library inductions to new students. We like that idea very much, so we're going to start doing that in the new academic year. And they also suggested asking academics to mention it if they are talking about this sort of issue. So they can talk about the fact that the library is aware of it and there might be materials in the library that have harmful or offensive language or content, and we'll work on ways of doing that using the links that we've got with our own departments. Okay, the last thing is just the figures for the number of clicks there have been from a short notice in our discovery system to the longer statement on the policies page. I strongly suspect that January 2024 was when we started promoting it to everyone, and that's why the figure is a lot higher there. Everyone's going, oh, let's have a look. And October would have been when we were meeting new students, going to the first education committees of the year, that kind of thing. But you can see there from the figures how many people click through from the short thing to the long thing. And I think that's everything I was going to say. So thank you for listening to that. If you've got questions, comments, you've done this kind of thing and you want to share your experience of doing it, that would be really good. We have a few minutes left, I think.
That was really interesting. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
Yeah, really interesting to see it step by step through your process of doing that. And also, if you get a chance to look at the chat, a few folks talking about how their libraries are doing similar things and often
Some things.
basing it on your work as well, which is really nice. I did pick out a few questions from the chat. Um, oh, Maria, you've got your hand raised. Do you want to go first?
Hi, afternoon, everyone. My name is Maria, and I work in University of East London. It's just a question because it's actually interesting on how you promote the notice statement. How it sounds silly, but how long have you prepared for it? So from the preparation up until the implementation of um, the notice. I'm just curious.
Yeah, uh, um, that is a very good question. And I'm not quite sure how long it took from sort of first thinking about this until making it available and starting to promote it. I want to say a year or something like that, something of
Okay.
that sort, I think.
And that
Um,
includes the consultation with the academics, with your colleagues as well in the
yes,
library, I'm assuming.
yes, yes. So the discussions we had with the senior library management and the education leadership group and so on. I think something like that is probably a reasonable guess on my part.
Okay. Thank you very much. This is
Thank you.
very, very interesting, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to pick out one of the questions from the chat. So I think we've sort of covered some of these already.
Hmm.
Um, so there's a question which says, have you found that there is more engagement with your inclusive collections team as you have interlinked with various departments? So I guess is that led to more engagement with the work, I guess.
Yeah, I think a lot of this sort of work, I think, goes on in other meetings or parts of the library and our engagement with academics, not just in the Inclusive Collections group itself. I think we're a sort of group that just we kind of make sure that the library is keeping on top of all of these things. I think I'd say um, that there is more discussion about this kind of thing between academics and me and my colleagues when they're compiling online reading lists, for example. There's more discussion of it within education committees within schools and departments. So certainly in the subjects that I support, there's been discussion of this kind of thing. And there's a student staff group within our medical school called MedRace that looks at wider issues within medicine. So we've talked to each other about this kind of thing. So I think it there probably is. It might be part of this wider institutional context where the institution as a whole is discussing this kind of thing. That's a bit of a driver for it, I think.
Excellent, great. Um, so we had another question which says, have you received any pushback or what types of pushback if you have,
Mm.
and how did you navigate it?
I'm not aware that we have had any. So that's really good if we haven't, or
That's
it
fantastic. Yeah.
yes, or it might just show that I'm way out of touch with everything, would be less good. Um, we've not had, as far as I know, anyone email us as a result of having seen the notice in our discovery system. It goes to a general librarian's email address, but it would get sent to me as the convener of the group, and I'm not aware there's been anything. Um, and I suppose within maybe within some subject areas, there's been more consideration of diversifying your reading lists and this kind of thing than in others. Certainly, the library champions, the volunteers that we met, there were students from law, there were students from psychology. They were very aware of this kind of thing, and there were modules they were doing where this had been discussed. perhaps in some other subject areas it's not been discussed. So it's maybe, no pushback, but just people not engaging with it, maybe.
That's fantastic. So I think and I think it's sort of come up in the chat, but I think yeah, fear of that kind of pushback from
Yeah.
some folks is what can hold us back often. So it's great that you haven't experienced that.
Yes.
So there's a question that's come up. How long did it take to get the inclusive collections wording agreed? So I think this is, and correct me in the chat if I'm wrong, I think this is the exact wording that
The
you
exact
did rather
wording.
than the actual process. It's from start to finish, I guess.
Yeah. I guess some of the time that it took was because we took it to meetings and we had to wait for the next meeting of whatever it was. So the library leadership team meets weekly, I think. So it didn't take long to get them to think about it. And they talked about it at a meeting and responded. The education leadership group takes place less often. I would think it was a few months, but some of that would have been waiting for a meeting. And I guess to be honest as well, we did the library leadership team and education leadership group. We met the students' union some little while after that, and they had a few more suggestions, which we may or may not have taken back to the library leadership team. Don't tell them I said that. But so the actual final wording might have taken a little bit longer, but some of it was waiting for the opportunity to meet with people, I think.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I think it's great that you've made changes along the way as well. I think again,
Yeah.
sometimes we think we've got to get it absolutely perfect the first time, and
Yeah.
sometimes that stops us from taking any action.
Mm-hmm.
Right, I'm just going to see if there's any more questions that I've missed. I think we covered that one in the presentation. If anyone's got any questions they want to raise their hand to ask, we have got a bit of time.
I spotted one earlier in the chat, I think,
Oh
about
yeah,
the sort of technical side of making the notice
yeah,
available. So I'd need to refer to my learned colleagues for an answer to that. So if you do want to know more about that, could you drop me an email and we can get back to you. So my Louise and particularly Alex, who did the technical work, be happy to provide more information about that.
awesome. And I think there's a question that's just come in. Are there any things you feel the wording in its present state are omitted? So I guess, is there anything that you would like to see in that statement that maybe didn't make it in? I think that's what Dan is asking.
Yes. One of the suggestions from the library champions was mentioning the word discriminatory, which we don't. And I think when we talked about their feedback afterwards, we perhaps thought how we had it already was okay. But I think that maybe there's always the possibility, isn't there, of wanting to amend this kind of thing. And like you were saying, Darren, it doesn't have to stay like this, does it? If there is a better way to put it, or there's new language to describe the kind of things we're talking about. So I think it probably, yeah, it probably is okay, but there might be things we'd want to do to it in the future.
Brilliant. And just one last question, I think, and then we'll need to finish. Mariam asked about do you have any trigger warnings on any individual? I'm guessing this could be either on individual catalog items,
Yeah.
individual items, or when you're reading lists or anything like that.
Not on individual catalogue items for the sort of workload related and how to identify them reasons that we talked about. No, not on any physical items. We have talked about this, and I think one of the things about it is that there'd be some items that might suggest themselves quite obviously as needing it, and there'd be other things that wouldn't because we who were doing the work wouldn't notice them. And there'd be the workload side of that as well. We've talked about it in relation to items on reading lists and items on resource lists, and we've done it. The one that comes to mind is Ackland Anatomy, which if you've got medicine or health, you'll maybe know Ackland Anatomy, which is not 3D animations or drawings. It's actual cadaveric specimens. It matches what our students meet. We have a dissecting room. We've put on our databases list where that appears, we've put something that makes it, we hope, clear that that's the case. Because we're thinking, somebody will be wanting an anatomical diagram for use if you're doing a teaching course or something like that, and you might be a bit surprised by what you get. So we've done it a little bit. There may be scope for doing more of it, but we've certainly talked about all these things.
Brilliant, thank you. We are just to time, so we're going to stop there. Thank you so much, Keith. That was really interesting.
Thank you.
Really active chat.
Thanks,
and
everyone.
Lots of questions, which is always a good sign. So we're going to stop there. So I'll stop the recording